What were the roles of women before, during, and after the war? How did World War II start? On September 1st, 1939, Hitler invaded Poland, and 2 days later, France and Britain declared war on Germany, beginning World War II. World War II started on 1939 and lasted all the way to 1945. The nations engaged in World War II were Germany, Italy, and Japan. The other nations were the Allies, France, Great Britain, the United States, the Soviet Union, and to a lesser extent, China. Women in the army? Not only men were included in World War II, but so was women. Women were significantly important for Australia and other countries. Australian women helped a lot by getting their men's weaponry ready to women being in the military. What roles did they have during World War II? The roles of women took a turn in World War II, and these roles were working voluntarily in conditions and places beyond their traditional roles, taking on roles that were ideally suited for men, taking on roles in the military that excluded combat. Voluntary work. Women knitted balaclavas, gloves, jumpers, and socks to be able to provide these items for the Australian Comfort Fund in order to send the items to men serving overseas for Australia. This is an image of women who had voluntarily helped Australia during World War II. Doing men's work. They made weaponry for the men who took on roles in combat. They also made a remarkably huge contribution to Australia's wartime production of binoculars, bomb and gun sights, cameras, periscopes, rangefinders, and telescopes. These productions from women allowed Australia to produce more productions needed for war. This is an image of women organizing the bullets for the men who are going to go into combat. Just under 80,000 Australian women enlisted in the Australian military services. Many Australians, including military personnel, disagreed on allowing women to participate in the military services and only accepted it because of need. The Women's Australian National Services organised women to drive army vehicles, ambulances, and aircrafts. Women were also trained in air raid drills, first aid, and basic military drills. This image was taken of women when they had learnt how to drive and service the vehicle for the Australian Army. Australian Women's Land Army. Australian Women's Land Army was established on 27 July 1942. The purpose of Australian Women's Land Army was to replace male farmers who enlisted in armed services or other work including the war with female farmers. These females were not getting paid by the government as the females had done its action voluntarily and was getting paid by the farmer. Females who wanted to be a member needed to be British subjects aged between 18 and 50. They handled most types of work involved with primary industries and not domestic work. A land army was placed in each state and handled the state's countryside's needs. However, some members were also sent interstate when unoccupied. This is an image of women voluntarily working at Australian Women's Land Army. Other military services. The other military services that women served were the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, the Women's Royal Australian Naval Service, the Australian Women's Army Service, and the Australian Army Medical Women's Service. What was life like before World War II for a woman? Before World War II, a stereotypical Australian family had the father working all day and earning money, while the mother who raised his children and looked after the house. This is an image of a wife looking after the children while the husband is at work earning money for the family. Women also worked out of the house, the same as men, but women weren't credited as much as men. Australians usually didn't take women seriously for attempting male work. These women were usually presented in the lower class or in the minority, and a lot of attitude towards these women weren't the brightest. This is due to the fact that men believed that a male could do their jobs in a different class compared to women. What were the roles of women before, during, and after the war? Before World War II, women who worked outside of their homes earned low wages. Some places where a woman worked out were factories, farms, or as domestic servants. Middle and high class women worked as household servants, which meant that they would usually cook, clean, and wash. During World War II, Australian women came in and helped and contributed massively to the war. Women contributed by making weaponry for men, to women being in the army and learning military drills. However, after the war, men came back and started returning to their jobs again, and many women lost their jobs and went back to being housewives. But due to a lot of men being injured or traumatized by the war, some women were able to keep their jobs. This is an image of a woman cooking at a household as a household servant. What challenges did Australian women face as a result of World War II? Many women had worked in World War II voluntarily. War is a dangerous place and has had life-changing consequences. Just because women were a different gender doesn't mean that the danger will be different. Betty Jeffrey was an example of that. Betty Jeffrey was a member of the Australian Army Nursing Service and she was captured by the Japanese after the fall of Singapore. As a result of being imprisoned by the Japanese for 3.5 years, Betty suffered from many diseases such as tuberculosis and amoebic dysentery, which she never recovered properly from. Many women were captured and were prisoners of war and suffered conditions similar to Betty Jeffrey. What effect women had been in World War II? With women filling in the shoes of men by filling the increased need for workers, working as postal workers and doing men considered work voluntarily, helped Australia a lot as there was more men that enlisted in the armed services or were working in other essential war work, allowed the Australian military to be not so weak in the offence and defence in war. However, Australian women taking male roles or working jobs ideally suited for men were often ridiculed by many. Also, from 1943, the government, for the duration of the war, permitted the women 75% of their male pay rate if they continued to work in industries which were important to the war. An increase in wages for women was an important and a positive effect of the war, making women taken seriously. Before World War II, Australians often ridiculed women for attempting male work and didn't take women working seriously. If they did, women would have earned low wages. However, during World War II, women worked voluntarily, completed roles ideally suited for men, and served in the military. The Australian Women's Land Army was established so it can replace all male workers who were enlisted in the armed services or doing work for the war. Members of the Australian Women's Land Army handled most types of work involved with primary industries. Without women working in the war, men in the military would have decreased, causing the Australians' military power to weaken in both offence and defence. Before war, many women were housewives, or a minority of women were working but earned low wages. During the war, majority of women contributed to the war by making weaponry, to women joining the army. After the war, many women lost their job as men came back from war, but some women kept their jobs as some men were either injured or traumatized from the war.